So I guess no additions or deletions. Any public comment? Nope. Okay. Hearing none. Approval of the minutes from our previous meeting on October 27th. Any additions, changes, or approving by consent agenda? Oh, I think Alice is talking, but that's okay. Okay, so I guess moving on to new business. Introduction of our new Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Mary Ellen Simmons. I don't know if Mary Ellen is introducing herself but whoever's going, take it away.
I can let Mary Ellen introduce herself. And Mary Ellen, if you could tell us a little bit about your background for folks who may not have been part of the interview process. Take it away.
So I'm Mary Ellen Simmons, and I come from a kind of a multi-step background. I started in the business world, in the financial industry, and worked there for about 15 years. And then I got a master's in social work, and I worked in some early ed programs. I'm giving you the abbreviated version. And worked in preschool and early ed programs. Then I worked in elementary school as a teacher, middle school as a teacher, high school as a teacher, and moved on to curriculum work, where I've been for about 5 to 7 years now, working in the area of curriculum. So I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here, and everyone's been so welcoming and a lot to learn, but it's been really great. And, before we get started on this meeting, I just wanted to say one thing, that these are unprecedented times that we're teaching in. We've never had this experience before in education. And I just want to put that on the table, because as we go forward tonight in our work, I think we should be mindful of that and be sensitive that, people are experiencing different feelings during these times, and to be kind to one another. So that's what I have to say. Glad to be here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. I guess moving on to 5.2, review of the fall assessment data. I guess, David, will you be presenting that on your screen?
I can present it on my team screen, rather, but the curriculum team will be leading us through that.
Okay.
So let me get that ready.
Would it be easier to share the slideshow through the chat so people can look at it, or do we need it shared on the screen?
Let's do both, and I'd be glad to put it on the in the chat as well.
Okay, and I actually think that I'm starting us off, and then in all my tabs that are open, I lost a little bit of notes that I wanted to look at. So hang on just one second. Mary Ellen just talked a little bit about these unprecedented times, which we all know. And if you have looked in, any newspaper articles, any education research talks about what this time is going to do, and how much our students are going to struggle because of the challenges with school in the spring. And there's many different ways to look at what happened in the spring and to look at that data. One way is to look at growth. So we can look at a student's growth from information that we had last year to information that we had this year, versus we can look at performance for a cohort this year and performance of a cohort last year. And with math, Venus and I chose to, and I guess I should be clear, we're going to start by talking about math, and then it's going to move into Karen talking about literacy. David, will you go to the next slide, please?
Absolutely. Just one moment.
Oh, and you actually could go to even the next one. So with math, Venus and I made some decisions about what we wanted to learn from the data. So go ahead and read this question. And as you can see, what we were most interested in was looking at the most important concepts at a given grade level and comparing how our students fared coming in at the beginning of this school year compared to their ability, which was the time that we gave a pretest in about January of 2020. And so our question was related to how does the ability of these students compare compared to how it compared in January? And I think you can go to the next one. To give you a little bit of background on why Venus and I made that decision, we have certain assessments that we use for mathematics in the district. At the K and, well, I guess kindergarten and first grade level, we use an assessment called the PNOA, which is the primary number and observation assessment. And then at grades 2 through 8, we use, we often refer to them as the math lab assessments. It's really just the term that we call them, which probably we should stop doing that. But I think we do that because we originally designed these assessments at the content areas that's most important at a student in each grade level. And we designed them for the purpose of giving us diagnostic information about their abilities and their needs for intervention. So those are the two assessments that we're going to be looking at today. And again, the reason that we chose to use this lens and looking into the math data is because in January, we had given kind of like the mid-year assessment, which we always do. We always give pre and post assessments. And in this case, it happened to be at the mid-year that we pre-tested at most grade levels, except for PMOA, which is actually their mid-year test. So we knew that instruction was going to have, well, okay, we hypothesized that instruction would have suffered from the spring. And we really wanted to look to see, okay, what gains did our students make during that time? What gains can we look at and see? And then, of course, we wanted to use that information to say, how's that going to drive our instruction moving forward? So you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, we kind of tried to separate out, like, this is what always happens in a school year versus these are the changes that we needed to make because of COVID. Any questions so far? Venus, you want to take it away? Did I miss anything there? And then you can just take it.
I don't think you missed anything. Okay, so here, this slide just really gives you the, it's a key to the next 2 slides of data, just telling you what the initials mean for each section and telling you a little bit about each one of the subcategories on the PNOA. If no one has any questions about those, we can just move right into the first set of data. Okay, so the first thing that I want to just bring your attention to is the title. And I tried to have the title be as clear as possible, in that it is the kindergarten PNOA that we are giving as a post in first grade. So the beginning of the year, first grade, but it's the kindergarten assessment that those first graders are taking. And then, as Chris said, I mean, we really wanted to just see where, when you hear people talking about kids losing as much as a year of their education, we really wanted to get a sense of, okay, so did our kids do that? Are they doing worse now than they were doing in January? And you can see that the bulk of our students, the big spikes, the big lines show that the majority of our kids sort of fell in the -5 to +4 range, which means that on any given category, our students didn't in general make a lot of movement in one direction or the other, which I think, based on some of the research that's out there, could be a lot worse. Now, each one of these colors represents a different section of the PNOA, and the amount of points that you could score on any of those is it varies. So the overall being the one where you could make the most gains is a culmination of a majority. You know, you can gain a few points in each section. But for me, it's less about how kids performed in each section and more about where is the majority of our data falling. And we can see it's in that area of minimal to no loss and or gain. And so I thought that was really good information. Over here, we can see on the far right, my right, is, you know, there were a handful of kids, maybe 10 kids, who scored more than 30 points above where they had in January. And there was not quite 25 kids who overall made a dip of about 25 points, or I'm sorry, about more than 10 points. But those two sections, notwithstanding, the rest of our students tended to be in one lump. So that was good news for me, I thought. And we can look at the next. Very similar. This is the first grade PNOA that we gave as a post-test at the beginning of second grade. So this, again, shows a lot of our kids in the -5 to +9 range in a lot of our categories. Overall, there were a number of kids who scored more than 30, but there was also quite a few kids who lost ground. And we can see that many of those kids probably lost that ground in the groupings and place value category, which isn't entirely unexpected, because that was an area of instruction that they didn't get to very much during remote learning. So teachers were prepared for that, and this assessment just confirmed what we had predicted. Does anyone have any questions about those two graphs, the reading of them, or any comments, observations they have about them?
I just had one quick question, Venus. For the less than 10 points on each of these, is it because they didn't vary much below 10? Or were there any large outliers like there are at the 30 or more category on the other end?
I'm sorry, Victoria, say that one more time. Is it?
So for the end category, you have, you know, less than -10. So I was curious because you hadn't gone out to, you know, -15 to 19, -20 to 24
Yeah.
on the other side. Was it because kids didn't lose that much, or just because it was so few that it didn't make for a very good graphic?
There were very few of them. So some of them did lose more than the 10, but not so many. So yeah, and it was starting to stretch the graph out really far. So I did just sort of call it at the -10.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, David. So here are the assessments that we administered 3rd through 8th. And all of them, with the exception of 5th grade, were administered as post assessments at the beginning of the year. So we can look at the additive reasoning in the next slide, which is post second grade. So most of these assessments are what Chris refers to as our Math Hub assessments. And most of them are out of 11 points, although some of them are out of 10 points. So the range isn't going to be very big in terms of, hopefully no kids are losing more than 10 points. So you can see that we've got, again, the majority of our information is centered in the center of that graph. So we've got -1 all the way to like +4, with the majority of our kids scoring 1 to 2 points more, which normally at the end of the year, we would expect kids to have at least scored 1 to 2 points more, depending on where they were, maybe more than that. But again, in a time where we're seeing kids, where professionals are saying kids lost an entire year, to see that, they continue to make progress during the spring was a good sign. Any questions about that? Okay, David, we can look at grade 3. So this was at the beginning of grade 4. So in this one, our graph is leaning more into the negative, so that third graders did lose more than we would have hoped from third grade into the beginning of fourth grade. Although a number of kids still scored in that +3 to -1 range, but the -1 to -4 is still higher than we would have liked. So that tells us that the beginning of fourth grade, we know that we have some heavy need to do some whole group instruction for all kids around a strong review of multiplication.
And Venus, I would add to, for this skill, multiplicative reasoning, it's a new skill introduced in third grade. Mm-hmm. So I think that might bear into these scores as well.
Yeah.
So just for clarification questions. So when you're looking at adding 8 or 9 points, that means that those children came in with a score of 4 or 3 to start out with, correct?
Yes. Yep. And just so that it's clear, any kid who didn't take both assessments is not included in this information. So, because it would be very disingenuous for me to, if they didn't take it in the winter, to then act like whatever score they got now is a gain. So all of those kids who didn't take both assessments have been removed from the data for all of these assessments. Okay, David, we can go on to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, so at the beginning of 6th grade, 5th graders were given the fractional reasoning assessment that they were given at the middle of 5th grade. And we can say they were sort of spread across, but many of them trending toward the center again in that 0 to 1. And then more so to the 3 to -2 range, which is pretty reasonable place to be. Teaching fractions via the internet was not something that most teachers were expert at in the spring. So I think they did what they could do. And for the most part, kids kind of stayed pretty steady in that area. And And I think Linda and Christine both had a really good handle on where kids were coming in, and were able to address those needs through the 6th grade curriculum. Questions about that? Okay. So nobody asked, but I wanted to be transparent about the fact that the 5th grade graph is missing. We did not post-assess 4th graders at the beginning of 5th grade, because that assessment that they would have taken is on multiplication, and we knew that that was not the focus that we wanted to have in 5th grade, knowing that those kids didn't have their fraction unit in the spring, and knowing that they were going to be really needy in that area. So we just gave them the fraction assessment, the very beginning fraction assessment that we had, that we used to give a couple of years back. But we really wanted to get sort of the nitty gritty of what do they have for fractions and what do they need. So with only just having the pre-data and not the data that would allow for a pre-post comparison, that's why it's missing. And that was what really seemed appropriate at that grade level. And so here is grade 6, proportional reasoning. So this is at the beginning of grade 7. And so you can see that kids going into 7th grade did really well. They continued to make a lot of progress. I will also say that they had done a lot of this work prior to remote learning, and they had had a big unit sort of from January to March, and we're just wrapping it up when remote learning started, and then continued to do some of this work during remote learning. So the results here weren't particularly surprising, but they showed that kids held on to what they gained in the spring. So that was a really positive sign. And the 8th grade is the last one. And again, a lot of that data is right there in that center, with a lot of kids in the 0 to 1 place, sort of staying in the same spot, and then a few more in the 3 to -2 range, with no kids dropping, more than -3 or 4, and even one kid going as far as making, 8 or 9 points gain. So, those are the graphs. I think, there's a lot of ways that we can look at data whenever we have data. I felt like this was a good story to tell right now, because we have lots of things that we can worry about and feel like we could be doing better, and feel really worried about kids. And while this is one measure, I think it feels good to know that kids didn't suffer a great deal in terms of math education over the spring. I don't think anyone anywhere could say, that was the best that we could have done, because it was brand new and no one had ever done it before. And everyone was doing the best that they could to react to a really crazy time. And we know that some kids didn't engage at all and some kids engaged a lot. And there was kids all along the spectrum. But when faced with what did you learn? What do you know now? We see that kids held on to what they had prior to March, and in a lot of cases continued to grow that math understanding. So while it isn't perfect at every grade and not a perfect measure, I just think it gives me something to smile about, to think, okay, this could have been a lot worse. And in some grades, it's really, it's very similar to data we would have expected at the end of the grade level. So I think that there was a lot to be happy about.
Okay, Alice?
Yes, I have a question about the overall process. I know that you can't test what hasn't been taught, but how did you monitor what was being taught in order to test it? Did teachers file lesson plans? Were the unit programs? That's the first part of my question, and then I have a second question about the process.
Okay, so these are assessments we give every year based on what should be taught, based on the Common Core and what we believe is most important at every grade level. So we didn't monitor what people were teaching in their classrooms, but assumed they were teaching what they were supposed to be teaching, based on what they would have taught had we been in school. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, and then I'll ask my second question. My second question is, recognizing that this is pre-post of the same group. So you're testing, your pre-testing group A and your post-testing group A. Did you compare that with what the results were from, say, a previous year for students that were in class all year, say, for example, the second grade, or even the third grade with their multiplication tables, that a standard group in the third grade in classroom made this much progress on an A to A pre-post test compared to students who were remote on an A to A pre-test post-test? I mean, do you see where I'm going with that? To see if there's a difference between kids who were taught in class and kids who were taught remotely, even though they might not have been the same group of kids.
So we didn't do that, and we didn't do that for a couple reasons. One, because the reality is we wouldn't have been talking about the same time frame, which felt unfair to then compare them, because one is taking them in like May or June, and some of these assessments were taken at the end of September, early October. And the other thing is, so usually when we give these assessments, they're at 18 points. And given the beginning of the year and, kids hadn't been in school for a long time, there was a number of reasons we chose to trim the assessments down so they weren't as long. And so then we would have had to cull through all the data and just look at individual items. And it got a little complicated, so we chose not to do that and to just to take the assessment as it was, and just focus on, are they, and that's where the question came from. Are kids, where are they in comparison to where they were? Did they make progress? Did they lose ground? And so that became the big focus. I feel like, though, you didn't get the answer you wanted to the first half of your question. So is there, I could try to answer it a different way, but I can't remember the question.
Well,
now.
the question was that basically you cannot test what hasn't been taught because it skews the data. So how did you know? How did you verify what was taught remotely. And take, for example, the multiplication tables, the multiplication in the 3rd grade. Did teachers, 3rd grade teachers, present the times tables? Did they practice them? Did they do instruction? Did they do practice? Did they do review?
Yeah. Yep, they did those things.
Okay.
They did some of that while they were in school, and they did a unit on multiplication in the area model when they were remote.
You know, in thinking about this question, I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. You know, so the data that we're looking at this evening is summative data, right, after a period of time where students would have been taught something. But the other type of data that our teachers would use is formative data, and that would be unit by unit. They would look and see at the end of unit tests, or even check-ins or exit tickets to see, you know, I taught such and such new multiplication concept today. Are my students getting it? So that's one formative way teachers can adjust their instruction while they're teaching. But I think the other thing to think about, particularly this school year, is that the other mechanisms that help curriculum in BUUSD progress, all right, and have everyone stay true to the curriculum, are the professional learning groups, the PLGs, that meet with the topic of looking at student achievement, looking at student results, and sharing best practices amongst themselves. And also the curriculum meetings where the different content areas work with our coaches and curriculum coordinators who are here in the meeting. So that, in addition to principals supervising their teachers, are just multiple ways that our district and other districts monitor instruction as the year moves along.
Okay. Yeah, I'll stop.
Okay, Mary Ellen, you had your hand raised as well.
Yes, I was just going to say that follow up kind of on something Venus was saying about you have to look at the time period on this. Normally, we see a slide during the summertime. And the fact that this was taken after a COVID period and the summertime, and we're really not seeing a huge slide, I think that speaks really strongly to the work that's been done.
So I know the answer is likely going to be no on this, but just in case, did you do any correlation between, you know, a large dip in score and a lack of participation in remote learning? Or because I know it's a huge data set to work on, but
you know, it's interesting because Jean and I had a conversation about trying to pull that data together. The problem was that attendance and participation didn't really go hand in hand, because in the spring, all you had to do was check in somehow. You didn't have to actually have to do anything. So a lot of the attendance looks really, really good, even though the report card will say this child did no work, but it shows that they were present, you know, for 39 of 39 days. So it was really impossible to make a correlation between participation and work completion and any reaction to the assessment. Yeah, because we tried, and then I just, like, it wasn't consistent enough of a measure that I couldn't do it. But we definitely had that idea.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, are we ready, Karen, for your portion?
Yep, let's move on. Thank you. You can go ahead to the next slide also. So similar to math, there's benchmark assessments that teachers have their students do 3 times a year, and then more formative assessments attached to units, pre-test, post-assessments, that sort of thing for both reading and writing. For kindergarten, we have the POA, Primary Observation Assessment, that has a few components in the fall, and then it builds in the wintertime. There's a few more. Fountas and Pinnell is added in the wintertime. And then our first and second graders all have Fountas and Pinnell conducted 3 times a year. And starting last year, we began the STAR 360 computer adaptive test for 3rd through 8th grade. And so the data that I pulled for today was kind of correlated to whatever each grade has in their assessment calendar. You can let me know if you have any questions as we go to, please. And you can go to the next slide, David. Thank you. So this is a snapshot of kindergarten through 8th grade, how they performed on those assessments I was speaking of this fall. And you can see the green is either meets or above standard in reading primarily, and then the gold is below standard. And some of the reports I've been reading kind of echo what we saw with our data and our students. Less impact at the lower grades, and then kind of in the middle, kind of where students are more reading to learn. That transition can be a really hard one for kiddos. So that might be reflected in our district's data as well. But we can also use this for our intervention. Teachers can see, well, which grades are there more students below standard that might need more attention, and what instructional strategies can we try this fall that we might not have been able to try last spring. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so these are cohorts of students. So current 4th grade, you can see are the first 2 clusters on the left side. And it begins at 4th grade because 3rd graders don't take the assessment until mid-year. And so we didn't have 2 years worth of data to compare. So the 2019-2020 column for the yellow and the green for below standard and meets or exceeds standard are the first to appear for each cohort. And then the following ones are for this past fall. And you can see that for most grades, there was a decrease in how many students met or exceeded the standard, with the exception of 8th grade. The 8th grade cohort had an increase in how many students were able to meet or exceed the standard. And this is our last slide for literacy data. And it shows a comparison of where each student, of each group of students and how they fell based on urgent intervention, on watch, or at or above benchmark. And there was a decrease in how many students were at or above the benchmark, which I think was what a lot of the reports coming out this summer had predicted. We know we have students that might have backtracked in terms of where they are starting off the school year. So they're the focus skills they would have started with this August are a few weeks or months behind what they would in a typical year. It doesn't mean we're not going to work towards getting them to where we would hope them to be in the spring. I know I've heard the term like you don't move the goalposts, you just address that their position on the field is different. So we have some students who their position on the field is where it is. And we're going to do what we can to help them make it to that goalpost. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I mean, I have more of a general kind of question that now that you have all of this data on these children, what exactly are you doing now that we're in remote learning for intervention?
Sure. So speaking to the reading interventionists, they're able to see even more students than they're able to see in a normal school year. The schedules are a bit more flexible. And so when a student had only been able to attend an intervention service 1 quarter a year or 2 quarters a year, they'd be able to stretch that out for potentially the entire year. So so long as we're able to get them to engage in that support, which we've been having some good feedback from our interventionists. The hope is that when we do our mid-year progress monitoring assessments, we'll get a lot of good data showing that all those efforts are paying off. And Venus or Chris, you can speak to math intervention if you like.
Math intervention is struggling. Last spring we offered, and the interventionist sort of tried to divide and conquer, and Chris and I were part of that as well. The issue is participation was greatly lacking. Many of the students that we invited to be a part of intervention chose not to be a part of intervention, or just didn't attend intervention sessions. And right now we're having an issue where we're only hearing back from about 50% of the students' parents that we're trying to engage with in terms of offering intervention. And of those 50%, we're seeing a very small percentage actually show up. And we're also having an issue with scheduling that's just been coming up as teachers are now being asked to do a full day schedule with their kiddos. They're scheduling things during times when interventionists were seeing kids. So they're having to do some rescheduling and shuffling around. And so we're very much still trying to get up and running, but really struggling with getting kids to participate.
For the curriculum team, I wanted to ask a question that came from one of the committee members this evening. And that question is this, and I think it would pertain to both intervention and then classroom instruction. And the question is, so when you find that a student, let's say a 5th grader, or let's say a 9th grader is well behind in their math skills, and might present themselves skill-wise like a 5th grader, either in remote learning mode or in traditional mode a few years ago, how would we help that student catch up? Karen, I was thinking of your analogy of not moving the goalpost.
Yeah, I think just answer, I know it was specifically math, but it might answer in regards to literacy. At these grade levels with the STAR 360, the targeted assessments, similar to how they would in math on those math lab assessments, help you to identify what focus skills that particular student is really struggling with the most. And I think that's where teachers and our interventionists and IEP teachers are able to put their efforts in on those specific focus skills that are most crucial to helping them gain ground.
And I'll speak towards to math. So over the past few years, Venus has spent a great deal of time and energy really improving that first wave instruction within the classroom, bringing in the math menu course, which really, I call it the math menu, but it's really all about math differentiation. And the premise behind that, and actually I know we presented to this exact team on this topic last year, but the premise is that every student should receive on grade level instruction. And with that said, they also need to receive that just right instruction. And so by taking on the math differentiation through math menu, we have really pushed towards making those changes where every student is receiving that on grade level instruction, but also receiving that just right instruction, both through math menu and through intervention. As you can imagine, both of those have become interesting, challenging. We could probably come up with other words to describe it during remote instruction. It doesn't mean that it's not still happening in some way, but we're working through those challenges. Venus, do you want to add?
Thank you, Christine. And Mary Ellen, that fits with something that I've heard you explain a number of times, that whether it's in COVID times or regular times, whether it's the BUUSD or another district, we do not lower expectations.
No. We always keep the expectations to those essential priorities that we've identified for the grade level. And what we do is we close those gaps in small groups. So we teach to the grade level and we support to bring the student up to the grade level. And I saw, that I actually really appreciate people asking questions about how do we support struggling students, because to me, that tells me that that's a value that you have, that we want to support all students. And so I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone have anything else on that? If not, we'll move on to old business with update on curriculum leadership roles and responsibilities.
Okay, I can talk about that a little bit, and that is something that Carol Merrill is tackling a bit with Mary Ellen and myself for the top of the organizational chart of the roles of superintendent and assistant superintendent. Looking at the job descriptions, we're finding that they're a mile long and incorporate every responsibility under the sun. And we are going to present to the board models of those that are more streamlined and efficient based on models that other districts are using for to let the board have feedback on those to make it, I guess, more clear and easier to supervise and manage as well. So that is the work that we are doing on that and can present at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. I guess now an update on the draft annual work plan. That's what, there wasn't one included in the packet. So do you have a Google Doc for that, David?
No, that's this committee's work. I can search for it. Maybe we want to move 6.2 to a little later and move on to 6.2.1.
Then let's go ahead with that. I guess who's discussing the Barry Rights contest? I don't know where, don't recall where this was generated from.
I think it was just in regards to updating the committee on things that are happening in the district. And so when I stepped into the role of literacy coordinator, I also took on the job of helping coordinate the Barry Rights contest in conjunction with Vermont Reads. It's just a tradition, I think we can call it by now. I think it's been going on for at least 10 years, maybe more, where students and adults are able to write to a particular theme. This year's theme had to do with self-awareness and confidence, and students were presented with the option of also creating an artwork piece to accompany their writing. And considering the interesting circumstances this fall, I think it was a success. We had participants at each grade level, and were able to have a virtual award ceremony mid-November, where the students were able to read their pieces and share their artwork. I think considering how we had to pivot a bit this year, it went pretty well. And we have a recording of that award ceremony, and our communication specialist is currently working on kind of sending it down. So it was about an hour long, and posting it for the district.
Okay, what about the 6.2.2 Barry Reads?
That's part of the same, yeah, it could have been the same line item. But the Aldrich Library is also part of the project, and they have some books that were grant funded that students and teachers are able to access.
Okay, and I guess the manual's here for technology use in hybrid and remote instruction. Are we correct? Mary, are you the one on topic for that?
All right, so I have some data points that I wanted to share with all of us on that topic. But I don't know, Mike, do you want me to go first and then you can come, or you want to go first?
Go ahead. It's fine.
I'm going to share my screen, and just so that we can just look at a few data. As you can imagine, I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, good. I can't see you because I'm, but as you can imagine, technology is, could be said to be the a kind of good news that happened to pandemic, because now everybody is using technology. So the usage of technology tools has dramatically went up. So I pulled a few data just to share with us to see how that usage has gone up. So I pulled, number one, the usage data from September through November 2020 to show the general activity of students. This one is based on students' usage. So I put this data to show the general activity of students. So take a look at this. So we can see here, this is data from September 1st to November 24th. So what we can see here is it can be expected. The times, Mondays and Tuesdays are the most popular days that students engage in online learning. Wednesday is a little bit down, then Thursday and Friday, they pick up again. And as can also be imagined, between 10 to 12 p.m. at the most active time for students. And I am also happy to know that the educational activities are way high than other non-educational activities that usually come up on Sundays and then Saturdays. And please stop me because I can't see you. So stop me if you have any question, just cut in and I will stop and answer. So the next slides are data that I pulled for 3 years. So I pulled the data from 2018, 2019, and 2020. And I compared the Google Classrooms that teachers have created within this period, from July to November of 2018, 2019, and then 2020, just to compare what it is. Because with pandemic, we've used Google Classroom as, our learning management system for the teachers. So here are the data. So the first one is from July to November 2008. You can see that the total classrooms that were created and that teachers were using are a total of 366 Google Classrooms. The same period in 2019, that is July through November, there's a slight increase in the number of Google Classrooms that teachers created. And take a look at this year, July through November 2020. You can see that the difference is almost astronomical. I mean, from 300 to 825 Google Classroom. So which tells us that technology is now the bedrock of learning. I mean, as you can imagine, because we are in hybrid and remote learning. So there are technologies used more than ever before. So I went ahead and also looked at a few data that I pulled about the student engagement in Google Tools. So I looked at Google Classroom, Google Meet, Google Drive, and Google Doc. And I compared just the time frame of 30 days ago, just to see the engagement that students are having using these Google tools. The first thing is you can see 1,697 students, users, used Google Classroom in the last 30 days. We can say that our number should be more than this, actually. But I think it's more of high school and middle school students, because the lower grades were using mostly Seesaw. So this is a good representation between high school students and middle school students. 1,697 students. And then check out the weeks. So from October 10, we have a little between 35,000 user engagement. And then as it goes, these are weekends. It goes down during the weekend, and then during the week it goes up. But what I just wanted to point out is as the week goes by, it keeps going up. So the highest was the week of 15th. So between 15th to 18th of November, we saw a climb here. So more than 450,000 student engagement using Google Classroom. The next one is Google Meet. The same trend, as you can see, the same trend. the week of November 15, November 18 went up, just like the first one that I've shown. This is just a data from 30 days ago, from 30 days. The next thing is the same Google Drive, the same thing, 1,757 students were actively using it. The same trend as we can see. And the final one, Google Doc, the same trend, which tells us that students and teachers, of course, are using Google tools much, much higher now than they used it a year ago or 2 years ago. One more data that I put is Seesaw. So this year we introduced Seesaw as our official platform for the lower grades. So I pulled a report of Seesaw activities from August through November 2020. And we see that across the district, we have 28,000 plus posts that teachers made on their students' Seesaw account. So this is very impressive. And we can also look at the visits by family members, more than 9,000. So students and teachers and families are using Seesaw to connect and to learn. Again, I didn't go into the quality or the efficacy of this, but I'm just showing the activity report here. And then the final slide shows the other tools that have high usage data: Flipgrid and Prodigy for Math, Freckles, Zen. The one thing that is common with these tools, they are all related directly to they have curriculum purposes for all these tools, and we see that more users are using it. Edpuzzle, we just introduced Edpuzzle like a month ago, and already 627 users in our domain are using it. So these are the few usage data that I wanted to point out to show that the pandemic has hit us bad, but our users are using technology in variety of ways. So if there are any questions, please let me know.
Emmanuel, when you showed the last slide of other tools and the number of users, are the users teachers and students or just teachers?
So the data we put is only for students, so it doesn't have teachers. So these are student users.
Emmanuel, thanks for sharing that data. I wanted to add a question that was brought up by one of the committee members beforehand. And could you describe how the technology group and the teachers have focused on the question of students needing to move from one app to another app to another app to do their learning? I know it was a goal of us entering this fall to have a unified approach. Could you explain how that is happening and how you see that?
Yes, so we have what we call our official platform for learning. So we use Google Classroom as our learning management system. So teachers post assignments on Google Classrooms, and then their students will get those assignments, and their students are expected to do those assignments in Google Classrooms. And then we use Google Meet for our official online meeting with students. So the district, we have the Google Enterprise for Education, which gives teachers and administrators more tools when it comes to Google Meet, like recording, doing breakout rooms, and a lot of different features that teachers can use during online learning. So these are our official platforms. And then for the lower grades, they use Seesaw for communication too, and also for assignments. So these are the official tools that we use. And then teachers also, they do, they are innovative. They go in and find even more tools to use for their purposes. So we have a few tools that we use, but these are our official recommended one that we are pushing as a district, and then teachers can also use other ones that they find.
Thank you.
This might be a nice segue for Mike to talk a little bit about instruction and how it can look differently. Mike, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that's
so
fine.
I was just wondering if Mike could describe how we can think of instruction differently in order to meet the needs of our students.
So that's a very big question, and actually the answer I think is embedded in it. We think about, I start right now with the perspective that seems obvious, but so much of what we're doing in this hybrid and remote learning mode looks a lot different than what we do face-to-face with kids. But we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. By that I mean that we start with our learning goals, or the standards, objectives. I'll just broadly speak to them as learning goals. And that's where we start, not with the technology. And as someone alluded to earlier as I was listening, COVID has provided an opportunity for us as a district and teachers to really raise the level of our knowledge and expertise that would not have been possible prior to this. Their teachers are now, 1st of December, compared to where they were as a group back in mid-March, is just tremendous growth that they've seen over the year, not even a year, 6-7 months. And because what they do, curriculum walks hand in hand with their instruction. So because the way that they conduct their day, their instruction looks so much different. It's, I think, required some, I'll call it reevaluation maybe, or reprioritizing of the learning goals, of the standards. And I'll just be frank, not all of the learning goals that we would have done face-to-face can be accomplished in a really satisfactory way remotely. It's just a very different environment. That doesn't mean you can modify, because I see teachers every day that are modifying things that they're trying to do. I think it helps for us for you guys as decision makers to think about, you need a common vocabulary and understanding that there are some strengths and weaknesses that remote learning just comes with. It's not just about knowing the difference between what asynchronous and synchronous learning is. It's also about what's direct instruction, what's guided practice, what's a flipped classroom. And not just knowing what those things are, but how do they work together? Because a lesson that is done remote looks a lot different than a lesson that's done face-to-face. We decide, teachers decide every day, how can I do direct instruction differently? Is it a live presentation in a Google Meet? Can I accomplish something better by creating a video? That's just, that example is very different than the way they've had to create lessons in face-to-face environments. Guided practice is something that we do, but that looks different in a remote setting. Sometimes guided practice is done more when the kids are face-to-face, when they're in the hybrid model, which we're not currently. I just think that this has given us an opportunity, and we have to see it as something required. We have to rethink how we have defined things in the past, lessons and teaching. It's obvious, but it shouldn't be understated. I think the last thing I'd like to just say is that I know in working with teachers over the last 6 or 8 months, it's easy for us as teachers to get into a habit of need to teach this goal, this concept. With remote learning, sometimes have to be willing to cast off things that you can't do very well. Substitute some things that you can perhaps do better, different ways using the tools that you didn't have available to you. So I don't know that I don't want to ramble, but that's sort of an overview of how I see teachers in my building. I'm at Barry City. How you're approaching this remote / hybrid kind of environment. Andrea Moore is our integrationist at Barry Town. If she has anything more to offer, if I've spoken way too much.
One thing that I would like to add is just kind of on the topic of having students maybe with too many apps to learn all at once. One thing that I think Mike and I probably he does, I do for sure with my teachers is I try to recommend, pick a couple that you feel really comfortable with that work with your curriculum and stick with those. So, Google platform, of course, or Seesaw, depending on your grade level. And then that list of things like Flipgrid or Edpuzzle, just find the things that really work with your curriculum, get comfortable with them. You have to explicitly teach them to your students so that they're comfortable with them, and stick with those things. And I try to tell them, don't try to do everything because we can't do everything, but just find what really works for your curriculum and your students. That's all I have.
Thank you, technology team.
Okay, thank you. I guess moving on to any other business. Tim or Alice have anything? David?
And I do have our work plan if you wanted to discuss that.
Okay.
Let me
Perfect.
present it.
Now, I know at our last meeting, we had kind of discussed how we were waiting for Mary Ellen to come on board to kind of flesh this out a bit. So I didn't know if you and David had been discussing a little bit about what you wanted to be presenting and discussing at these meetings.
Having been here only 4 weeks, I'm still getting my feet under me, and so, I think the quick look on this, yes, this is where we want to go, but I am sure that we will be adding more in as the months go through, as we get clearer and clearer on what information would be really important for the committee to review.
Mary Ellen, let me ask, I know that you've connected with the students at Vermont Law School on some equity work, and you have a plan for that. Not that we need to go over it in great detail tonight, because it's not necessarily on the agenda. But is that something that we might be able to talk more about in December, or is January better?
What David is referring to is that we have met with 2 Vermont Law School students in their final year of the law school, and they're willing to work with us to develop a policy, procedures, and professional development and we're going to be creating an equity, racial justice, inclusion task force. So you'll be hearing more about that. December might be just a little bit early because I think the policy committee meeting is at the kind of in the week of the 20th, which is the same week I think as this next meeting. So that might have to be moved a month or two. But you will be hearing more about that, and we will be reaching out because it is a community collaborative effort where we want input from teachers and faculties and community members to talk about what are some of the issues that Barry is facing.
Victoria, let me ask, because we moved this meeting to December 1st here, with your workflow, are you thinking of a second meeting in December, considering the board work on budget, et cetera, or going and having a meeting in January?
I honestly had not thought about that since we moved it. I think, again, let me see the coming up on the dates in December, because we would be the 22nd. So yeah, I think maybe if we just bump December's meeting and meet the, what is it, the third week of, or the fourth week of January, and just skip the later December meeting. Will probably be best for everyone's calendars.
Would it make sense to move the update from the Regional Advisory Board to that meeting, because we do not have it ready tonight, and the update on instructional models?
Correct. The intentions were for the later meeting in December, but since we moved November to December's, those were still, so these would be bumped to January.
Good. And then maybe Alice could speak to this, the strategic planning group beginning its work. That's with the vision and mission group. Is that right, Alice?
Yes. The first part is to put together the design team, and that design team comes from the main board, the folks that they would like to see on that initial design team, and then to roll it out further into the mission, vision, and actual plan group after we collect all the information. And if I could, just to speak a little bit on the equity part of creating an equity task force, we might want to think about being combining that with strategic planning, because rather than having two parallel groups trying to find people, do surveys, whatever. So we might want to talk about at some time seeing how that equity task force and the strategic planning group can work together on collecting that information. Okay.
So
Yeah,
is there anything else? Oh.
You go first, Victoria.
I was going to say, so since it kind of seems as though making this work plan essentially are items for the future agenda, does anyone else have any other suggestions moving it to January that would be able to be presented?
No, I think January would be a good thing. Having meeting on top of one another without time to actually collect information to present at a meeting is pretty redundant.
So David, what else did you have to add?
No, I was just going to agree that that is a good plan.
Okay, so then on our January meeting, we'll have the discussion strategic planning group. we'll hopefully have the update from the board, because I know, didn't they move their meeting? I don't know if Andrea has the date on that. And then I don't know about the equity audit, if that will be able, since there should have been at least one policy meeting in between then, to have a preliminary outline or something.
The next time we meet with the equity group, we can let you know what the process will be as we unfold it. But we're going to start with the policy committee first.
Okay, thank you. So does anyone have anything that they'd like to discuss at our January meeting?
I think, Vicki, this is Alice. Victoria, this is Alice. I'd like to begin to think about how we're going to go about, and if suddenly someone says and turns the faucet on and says, okay, everybody back in the pool, how are we going to put everybody back in the pool? What are we going to do to make sure that we have a smooth transition from remote learning to in-school learning?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Victoria, I also would like to discuss, I want the play-by-play exact day count on how we're going to begin to really assess and see the damage that has been done by people being out of school for so long, and getting people in the right programs to get them back on track. And not some nebulous sort of, 3 years from now, we're going to, no. Within day 2, you will have this test. Within day 3, you will start doing this, whatever the answer is. But we need to know this, because parents are starting to get up in arms about this.
So essentially you're looking for, what's the assessment plan? What's the intervention plan as soon as school starts back in person, correct?
Correct. And I want hard, fast dates on how long it's going to take, so we can get the parents all involved with this now. It shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 days, because we've had 6 months to plan this.
Tim, I need to ask a little bit more about the question. We presented tonight about the data and intervention, and how intervention works and how we track progress. And that's how we would do just what you're talking about.
And that would take how long to get people back on track?
I think it might be good to look at the data, because what the team was presenting tonight was that there was some lag, yes, that would be expected, and mirrors that in other schools, etc.
So between now and January, you guys can look at the data and you can decide how long it's going to take to get kids back on track. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that this work is ongoing. And Mary Ellen, you were speaking.
Yeah, I'm sorry, David, if you're interrupting.
So we're thinking that when kids come back to school, eventually that they're going to wander aimlessly until we find them a home to get the education they need.
Well, I think, Tim, what David is saying is that right now we have a plan for intervention for kids who are falling behind and struggling, and we're going to continue that process, whether they're in the building or out of the building. The only difference is that they'll be face-to-face instead of virtual.
Okay.
It's happening right now. It's already happening, closing those gaps, identifying areas where students have needs, so that we're not waiting for that coming back to school for that to happen.
That's not the feedback I'm getting from parents, and I'll have them contact you guys directly to tell them why they're wrong.
Well, one of the things, Tim, is that Venus actually discussed that we have a lack of student and parent participation in the offered intervention sessions that are being given.
No, I agree with you. If parents are coming to me and complaining about something that they're not doing, that is inappropriate. They should be complaining to you guys.
That's right.
Right. So I think probably what is more advantageous for our next session in January is to actually have a discussion about the number of kids who are, have been flagged for intervention, the number of kids who are participating in intervention, the improvement of those children, and then the ones who are continuing to lag behind because of the lack of participation.
Well, I guess eventually the teachers are all going to have to go back to work, God help us. And then we cannot have anybody get surprised that children come back to school and they're not ready for an education to be in the 9th or 10th or whatever grade it is.
Yeah.
Victoria, am I hearing you say for the January agenda, an update on intervention might be a good topic?
Yes, I think that would probably be, an update on assessment and intervention. So I think essentially, Alice, the transition from remote to in-person instruction, a plan for assessment and intervention, as an outline of the equity audit work as to what will be moving forward, an update from the RAB board. And I think that was it.
And David, maybe we can bring suggestions for families who do contact board members. What is the process for them? Because we definitely want to hear from them, but maybe bringing it, skipping 3 levels might not be the first step. So if we could maybe outline that procedure, that would be really, I think, helpful for everybody so that we can meet the needs of all the families. We don't want anyone not having a place to voice their concerns. So.
Well, it's not about not being able to voice your concerns. I think people have been voicing their concerns since last March. I think it's about seeing some action.
Okay, so I think a little more of that actually for any of our audience. We have more of the extended remote learning plan that will be discussed on Thursday at our board meeting, which didn't get into the curriculum packet, but will give better guidance to parents as to what their students should be doing and participating in. So hopefully some of the curriculum people can be at that meeting on Thursday for the discussion. Okay, so we kind of have our future agenda items. So I guess our next meeting will be January 26th at 5:30. Okay. So I guess that's it. We consent to adjourn now, don't we, Andrea? I'm learning. So does anyone have anything else before we adjourn?
I want to thank the curriculum team for joining us this evening and for all of your work preparing that material and explaining it to us. And for the committee members who submitted questions, I know this is a new thing that I'm trying out, but having a few questions in advance, we did look at those and it helped people think about how we could give good responses to those. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
And if David, if you can send me the attendance list and the recording, that'd be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.